I have a question to ask you. How did digital code on a screen become worth $1.5 trillion in less than 20 years?
According to federal statistics, the upper half of the American people take home 90% of income, leaving about 10% for the lower half of Americans. Where are we headed in this country?
This is the story of how an infamous name,
Satoshi Nakamoto,
would cause the biggest threat to a global monetary system that has existed for hundreds of years.
She's probably massively depressed. I mean, I bet, like, that's also, like, it's artist's interpretation of the energy she's giving off in court. I mean, she has to rat on her boyfriend, and she's already pleaded guilty, and, you know, for a lesser sentence, she's gonna rat him out.
Everything started to fall apart until I couldn't make sense of it anymore.
Mr. David, order! Miss Order!
Despite the chaos, the numbers kept on rising and rising and rising.
Bitcoin and a few other major cryptocurrencies. Yeah, so with the BTC, our target is 210,000.
Excuse me? 210,000?
Yes.
Regardless, there was a question that still lingered within me. What's gonna happen next?
All of the Bitcoin in the world.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
It actually does have a much higher transaction volume capability than Bitcoin.
It is not looking very good for Bitcoin right now.
My experience with Bitcoin, or cryptocurrency for that matter, was when I started my first business project back in 2020. I couldn't really find a payment processor that I could use to receive payments. All the popular ones, like Stripe, weren't available in my country, and PayPal had restrictions because of government sanctions. This really set me back because I felt like I had no way of making money online. That was until when a friend hit me up talking about some crypto project she found.
Just like, get this thing. It's a cryptocurrency. It is building. It's like in its middle stages, I suppose.
I didn't really know what all this was, so I decided to take a look into it. And my God, I found it fascinating. Given how I was kind of resentful at the time, it felt like this was the big thing, the revolution that would throw restricting banks and unfair financial institutions out of power and bring form a free economy where anyone could do whatever they want online without any restrictions. But could I have been wrong for thinking this way? Let's investigate.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world.
For many people, this was when the downfall of money began, not just for the United States, but for every single nation in the world. But how did it get to this point? To understand all this fully, I think it's important to go back a lot further, to where the concept of money started. A popular theory denotes how money was invented as a means to maintain an accurate record of who owned what, or to keep track of whatever goods or services that were being traded at the time. Even the early forms of currency were not used to buy or sell anything. Instead, they were used to create, maintain, or otherwise reorganize relations between people, to arrange marriages, to establish the paternity of children, head off feuds, console mourners at funerals, seek forgiveness or compensation in the case of crimes, negotiate treaties, and so forth. This suggests that the idea of money has existed long before the concept of commercial trade. Although it is impossible to track down the true origin of money, it ended up harboring two consistent forms that we can keep track with, which are money of account. This includes debit and credit on a ledger, which depended on the ability to record each count. The second is money of exchange. This includes the use of representative money. It predates the use of coins by several thousand years. Civilizations such as Babylon, India, and China used to use clay tokens and other material were used as evidence of ownership when it came to goods. The concept or the idea of money being used as a medium of exchange came between 9000 and 6000 BC. This was the time where livestock and plant production were being used as money, but the common problem was agriculture was slow to produce. That's when debit and credit was introduced to keep track and record this process. However, when this concept of exchange grew to an international level based on how countries started to trade with one another, that's when the concept of money started to come into use. But trading with foreigners needed a form of currency that was not tied to a local temple or economy. The currency forms that ended up being the most popular were gold and silver. Between 1000 BC and 400 AD, all types of disc-shaped metal coins started being used as a medium of value and exchange, with civilizations like China during the Zhou dynasty and Rome during the prioritization of Moneta's worship, a Greek goddess that became the personification of money, bringing on the forefront of this adoption. This concept later grew the Roman Empire. Later, between the year 734 and 1200, the penny was the only denomination of coin in Western Europe, minted without oversight by bishops, cities, feudal lords, and fiefdoms. Paper money was introduced in Song Dynasty China in the 11th century. However, the development of banknotes began in the 7th century, with local issues of paper money at the time. Its roots were merchant receipts of depositing during the Tang Dynasty as a result of carrying large sums of gold, silver, and copper. In Europe, paper money became known in the 13th century through the accounts of travelers, such as Marco Polo and William Rubric. This form of money would later become the predecessor of banknotes. In the later years that were to come, the first appearance of banknotes in Europe were in the year 1661 under the Bank Stockholm's Banco and became widely popular in all Western countries. These banknotes stood as the representation of money, which could be converted into gold or silver whenever you had the chance to visit the bank. Now let's fast forward to the war. In 1944, almost after the official end of the Cold War, the US and the UK had a negotiation over how to govern the world economy under the Bretton Woods Agreement, as well as its monetary system, and came up with the World Bank and the IMF. This was the event where they decided that the gold standard would be tied to the United States dollar, gaining favor over how they won the war, which in a way made the US dollar the currency of the world. However, this all supposedly came to a close when America went to war with Vietnam for 30 years and neglected their role as global financial oversight because of how expensive this war was. In order to keep up with the costs, the US under President Nixon started to print money that did not equate to the amount of gold in possession, which unfortunately was against the rules. France, out of insecurity, would go to the US to reclaim its gold back. However, the US allegedly didn't give it back and continued their war while letting go of its gold standard status, leaving the value of the US dollar to be based on its people's trust alone. These events marked the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. From then on, countries from all over the world would decide whatever value of exchange their currency were, which led to the birth of what we know today as fiat currency.
The US held the gold-backed standard until 1971, when President Nixon announced that the US would no longer convert dollars to gold. Every time a nation has depegged from a physical standard, their paper notes have lost value because the urge to print more money at no cost is irresistible.
So what exactly is fiat currency? This is the first form of money that has not been tied to any commodity. Back then, it was usually gold or silver, so in essence, it was just a piece of paper with perceived value. Fiat currency holds two forms. Its paper money version, which usually houses 3% of a first world country's monetary system, followed by its digital version, which usually holds the remaining 97%. To understand this massive difference, first we have to look at how digital currency came to be. The idea came from David Chum under a research paper titled Blind Signatures for Untraceable Payments. This idea introduced the concept of digital cash in 1989, and he later founded a company called DigiCash, an electronic cash company in Amsterdam, to commercialize the ideas in his research. That same company filed for bankruptcy in 1998. But before that, with the adoption of the internet, two enthusiasts, Douglas Jackson, an oncologist, and Barry Downey, an attorney, founded eGold in 1996.
eGold is a currency that's currently pretty popularized with a lot of online users as a form of exchange. Some people actually use it to replace PayPal.
This currency was backed by gold coins that were stored in a reserve. Other denominations like PayPal came to form around this time, and the idea of digitizing the financial industry came into mainstream adoption. Despite that, why did people really lose faith in fiat currency?
The thing that traders and investors were probably worried about the most in today's trading was seeing a hotter than expected inflation print, and that's exactly what they got. The consumer price index for the month of May came in 1% higher than it was in April. That was higher than the 0.7% gain that economists were expecting.
By 2010, the total UK money supply stood at £2.15 trillion. 2.6% of this was physical cash, which stood at £53 billion. The rest of the 97.4%, which was £2.1 trillion, was digital currency. 3% of this money was created by central banks, which was money that could not be charged interest and could be transferred to the treasury as a form of fundraising for the government. This type of money was called seigniorage. All the money that was printed and sold went directly to the treasury for hundreds of years. This is how the system worked. But when commercial banks came into the scene, this is when the government and central banks lost control of money, and that control was claimed by private banks. The terminology of the money they created was referred to as commercial bank money, and the concept of money became more electronic. This was when things started to become a little tricky, because there was no production cost when it came to making this money, and the loans they would give out were illusory, which means the amount of profit they could make from all this was infinite.
Banks create additional broad money whenever they make a loan. Now, while this is nothing new, it is sometimes overlooked as the main way in which money is created. And it runs contrary to the view sometimes put forward that banks can only lend out deposits that they already have. In fact, loans create deposits, not the other way around.
Based on the percentages I talked about earlier, while the Treasury would make $18 billion over the course of a decade, commercial banks would make $1.2 trillion in profit from creating cash. Most people think that banks make money by lending out the depositors' money, but that's not necessarily true. They do it by inventing new money. The logic of how they create this new money was based on extending credit for customers, creating loans, buying existing assets, or making payments on their own account, which mostly involved expanding their assets. In today's world, the banks are no longer restricted based on how much they can lend and how much new credit they can create out of nothing. These banks are solely restricted on their own willingness to lend. In hindsight, the only way for an economy to exist is if people keep borrowing from the banks. In return, these banks make new money from that, which in turn leads to an insatiable amount of profits. No wonder why they never stop themselves from becoming a cancerous printing money machine. Another reason why the general public stopped believing in fiat currency was because of bank bailouts. A bank bailout is when a bank, under the authority of the government, offer money, or in corporate terms, a capital injection, to a company that's usually failing to prevent the consequences of bankruptcy, mainly because the downfall or its failure to maintain its obligations may lead to an adverse effect, not just on its market sector, but the economy at large. These bailouts prevent things like job loss, economic instability, loss of investor confidence, legal complications, and a lot more. An example of a bailout was during the Panic of 1792. Debt from the Revolutionary War led the US government to bail out 13 of its states. Although bailouts can be lucrative, they lead to a lot of problems. Companies can become reckless without a single care in the world, if they wanted to, in full knowledge that the government and financial institutions will bail them out. And the more these things occur, the greater it leads to more money printing. And the person that ends up responsible for clearing up all these messes, as well as enduring its liabilities, is the taxpayer having to part ways from their hard-earned money every single time each disaster occurs. Because of the large sums of money being printed, the government started to fear inflation, so the only way to balance everything out was through the increase in taxes. This, quote-unquote, was meant to stabilize the currency's value. So the more money that they printed, the more they started taxing everything. And I mean everything. The other reason is the concept of debt and money supply. The current condition of today's money is debt, given how money is created out of nothing when banks create loans, which explains things like college, car, and mortgage loans. All of that is nothing more than debt being plagued in the economic system. With money being taken off the gold standard, that meant that there was no way that the public's savings could be protected from the rising inflation. And the cause of this inflation was the ever-increasing money supply. As time went on, people started to notice how fiat money was being used as a mechanism to fund expensive wars. As per record, the US government has spent over $8 trillion in order to fund the post 9/11 wars. Until this day, the US spends about $800 billion each year on its military, despite having an estimate of $36 trillion in debt. And the people who are funding these wars without even noticing it were the middle class, based on the continuous rise of taxes. Because of inflation, there was a rise of civil unrest. There was a lot of protests from people who could not earn enough money to cover their expenses and to save. People would tire out, especially during hyperinflation, because their wages couldn't keep up, which means naturally the working class would be torn apart, because all this would result in them not being able to afford anything. The average cost of basic human needs like food, water, and transportation has become $5,000 more than what the average American can make. Now imagine what it's like in other countries, where their economy is basically dystopian. With the way things are going, it really means that people can't really have a safe retirement, and those who are younger can't really have their lives started. There are two things that cause inflation, which are general disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes. Then there's the second form, which is monetary inflation, which constitutes about 98% of that inflation rate. The reason why there's so much inflation on the monetary side is because goods and services are placed on a currency that is within itself inflammatory, which made it obvious to everyone that the financial system that exists today only benefits those that are in power. The oligarchy, the elite, the few. To put it into simpler terms, it became clear that this system was designed to cipher away money from the working class. What I find funny the most is that a silver coin version of $1 is now worth $37 of fiat currency. So in essence, prices aren't really going up because of inflation. They're going up because of currency devaluation.
A lot of people are worried about their bank these days. While devastated giants like Citigroup get bailed out again and again and again, many smaller banks are failing. The federal agency that takes over unsound banks is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the same people who guarantee that depositors won't lose their money.
The thing that untangled these strings of webs the most was the recession of 2008. It happened due to the cause of the growing vulnerabilities in the financial system, along with the housing market bubble in the US during 2005 and 2012. This was the time where house prices fell and homeowners started to abandon their mortgages, which means that the value of mortgage-backed securities held by investment banks declined in 2007 and 2008. This phase is called the subprime crisis. On a global scale, the recession led to a sharp drop in international trade, raising unemployment and slumping commodity prices. At this point, humanity needed hope through these strenuous times, and for many people, that hope perhaps was Bitcoin. In 2008, Bitcoin came into form. This invention would supposedly become humanity's new hope for a new, efficient monetary system, registered by the domain name bitcoin.org by this unknown Satoshi Nakamoto figure. On the 18th of August of that year, no one knew at the time that this invention would be a global sensation, but the question is, why did it gain so much mainstream adoption and become the new opium of the people? The first thing I would argue is its simplicity. In a lot of ways, Bitcoin is a lot similar to email. For instance, there are many cryptocurrencies that came before it, like Atom Back's Hashcash and the one that I alluded to earlier, eCash. These projects failed due to various reasons, like not having central control, proof of work issues, cyber attacks, and not being able to solve the double spend problem. Bitcoin somehow managed to overcome them all.
But we'll never get our rightful share from Farmer Jones. Overthrow this evil tyrant, and we shall be rich and free. Courage!
The reason why it's so simple to use is because of how its wallet address has an alphanumeric nature that's very similar to email. Another reason why Bitcoin became so popular was how it overcame the double spend problem by using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server that generates computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. This complex technology is also known as blockchain ledger. All this was achieved through a decentralized network of miners, something that digital currencies that came before it couldn't do.
In a society where the currency is collapsing and hyperinflation, the Weimar Republic, famous example. So you work, I pay, in Zimbabwe they had it, in Venezuela they had it, in Nigeria they're getting it right now. You work, I give you $100, and the $100 buys you 4 meals, but then in 3 months it buys you 1 meal, and then in 12 months it buys you 1 soda, and in 24 months it buys you nothing. Okay, so now you've got a problem. You can't store economic energy.
Bitcoin seems to have cheaper fees as compared to credit cards. That's because Bitcoin has less involvement. When it comes to third-party intermediaries, the fees from the transactions can only come from the exchange that you're using. Unlike credit cards that have a lot of intermediaries, like financial institutions. For example, a Visa has 5 parties involved: the credit card network, the merchant network, the inquirer, which is the financial institution that enables the payment to the merchant, the issuer, and the individual carder, and sometimes a 6th party, which could be the payment processor. In addition to its appeal, Bitcoin has no taxes nor government fees. Given how the monetary system was removed from the gold standard, it has proven to not be reliable when it came to being a store of value, especially during a recession. It had usually been gold that had been used as a store of value over long periods of time and used to hedge against market turndowns, despite how cryptocurrencies are relatively new as compared to gold, which has dominated the markets for thousands of years. Crypto has gained a lot of favor, especially during the brief COVID-19 recession. Now that we have went through all the metrics that made Bitcoin really popular, my next question was, how does it really work? My understanding of this is that the Bitcoin technology operates under the rules that are within a document called a white paper. This document is marketed to consumers or customers that is used to display a concept, outline features, or a solution to a problem, usually in comprehensive detail. Bitcoin's white paper, published on the 31st of October 2008, aimed to change the global payment system and revolutionize data management. The fundamental definition of Bitcoin is that it is a digital currency in which a record of transactions are maintained and new units of currency are generated through the computational solution of mathematical problems, which operate independently from a central bank. This infamous digital currency is measured by what is known as a Satoshi, which is the smallest unit of a Bitcoin. It is 100 millionth of a single Bitcoin. A Satoshi is used to calculate stuff like fee per byte or a facet reward. One of the most impressive technologies that even I can advocate for that was conceptualized by Bitcoin was blockchain. Blockchain is a distributed database or ledger that's shared across a computer's network nodes. In cryptocurrency systems, its role is maintaining a secure and decentralized record of transactions. This blockchain consists of programs called scripts. They conduct the tasks that you usually would in a database. Many digital currencies that came before it had failed at solving the concept of proof of work and the double spend problem. To give you a clear, digestible format of this, blockchain represents a significant innovation in information technology.
Now, don't be confused about Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is an asset. It goes up and down, and that should be of interest to you if you're a speculator. More broadly, it's a cryptocurrency. It's not a fiat currency controlled by a nation state, and that's of greater interest. But the real pony here is the underlying technology. It's called blockchain.
Now that we have an understanding of what Bitcoin is, I wanted to understand why it became the opium of the people that has caused a massive revolution and led to a 500 million cult-like following in less than 20 years of it existing. Let's start with the banking system. According to the World Bank, there's nearly 1.4 billion adults all over the world who do not have a bank account with a financial institution. In third world countries like mine, some of the reasons for this is unemployment and lack of education, which can adversely affect financial literacy, which includes understanding the jargons and paperwork that comes along with managing a bank account. Although crypto has a lot of technicalities to it, the concept of owning it and sending it to someone else is pretty simple. All you have to do is set up an account with an exchange or buy it from a friend, and presto, you are now a Bitcoin owner. You didn't need to go to a financial institution, go through a series of paperwork, and wait to be approved. That's if you do qualify at all. Bitcoin is a decentralized network, which means it does not have anyone who rules over it. It is an anti-state symbol, which means no governments can dictate its value or create more of it. You can't be taxed for having or owning Bitcoin. There are no restrictions or sanctions from these state groups that prevent you from using it. The reason why this is so important is because there are financial institutions out there like JP Morgan that only offer their private banking services to individuals or institutions that are worth at least $10 million in net worth. Through digital assets like Bitcoin, people gain the concept of digital property rights or entities over their digital assets and intellectual property. To put it simply, simply, the government won't have access to your money. A popular example that puts all this into favor is how Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, worked to use banks to cut off money for truckers when they were protesting over the COVID restrictions that were put on them. Other examples are things like banks being blocked in Moscow. They were still able to continue their economic activities thanks to the use of Bitcoin. Another point I found interesting is how the US government has the discretionary ability to effectively turn off savings of entire nations, like what they did with Afghanistan, for better or for worse. An example of this was after the Taliban took over, and that's what they also did with Russia in February. Bitcoin stood as a staple for countries that have faced economic sanctions, hyperinflation, government dictatorships, and human rights violation oversights. All those individuals who have to endure such unfairness have an option to stray away from the norms of conventional monetary systems. With cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, it proved that you could make your own rules and live life the way you choose if you had enough conviction. In 1998, a man named Bernard von Neuhaus invented a currency called Liberty. This currency was different from all the others because it was backed by precious metal. Its discernible value was an ounce of silver. This went for 20 Liberty dollars, gaining attention from federal government officials. In 2007, he was found guilty in violation of Code 18 USC 486, which forbids citizens or companies from producing coins that were made out of metal and used for money. Later that year, the FBI launched a raid and seized all the Liberty dollars, as well as precious metals and computers that they used to store all the information they possessed. The company was then shut down, and all the Liberty bank accounts were frozen. Bernard was later sentenced to 5 years in prison. But what most people didn't know was that he had a prodigy that he would communicate with from time to time that was inspired by his work of the Liberty dollar. This prodigy was a hacker under the alias Satoshi Nakamoto.
Well, because it isn't based on anything. It has no tie to value whatsoever at all. It's manipulated by the government for their own means, which is, what is their means? War, war, and more war. There's something morally wrong with a fiat currency that does nothing more than enrich the damn politicians, kills our people, and finances war. There's something wrong with that.
On the 31st of October, the hacker would release a 9-page white paper that would introduce a global monetary system that would no longer be ruled out by the government or any financial institution. Fearing a similar fate of his idol, Satoshi would disappear short after its release, never to be heard of again. Bitcoin started off as some nerdy technology, embraced by respectable hackers and computer geeks alike.
So how much Bitcoin should we hold anyways? What's the proper allocation? And my view is, it's no longer about if you own Bitcoin, it's how much of it you have.
But its potential was not completely written off or underrated. 2010 came to be the year that formed one of the biggest Bitcoin exchanges. At its peak, it was responsible for 70 to 80% of all transactions. The company behind it was known to be Mt. Gox. Originally, it was an online platform to trade cards from a game called Magic the Gathering, created by Jed McCaleb after it being transferred to Mark Kapelis. Soon after that, it became a target for hackers, which issued in a lot of security issues. And in February 2014, it is said to have lost up to 850,000 bitcoins, which is equivalent to over $1 billion. This left the company to file for bankruptcy.
Mt. Gox, once the world's biggest trading platform for the virtual currency Bitcoin, abruptly halted all of its transactions on Tuesday, raising concerns among users and prompting questions about the future of Bitcoin itself. The Mt. Gox website and Twitter accounts went blank, and its Japan-based office was empty. All Mt. Gox's chief executive said by way of explanation was that the business was at a turning point. Meanwhile, the CEO of Mt. Gox resigned on Sunday, and the company stopped withdrawals from its trading accounts weeks ago to protect itself from cyber attacks.
Its CEO Mark was found guilty of falsifying data to inflate holdings, with close to 25,000 customers filing complaints. Around this time, there was another scandal of a web page found on the dark web called Silk Road, founded by Ross William Ulbricht in 2011. Because of how anonymous it was, it became a safe haven for bad actors. There were all kinds of services, like the purchasing of hardcore drugs, to black hat hacking, and a lot more shady stuff. The site generated about 200 million and racking up about 100,000 users upon its first inception. About 2 years later, in the year 2013, it was shut down by the feds. leaving Ross with a life sentence. I know that this sounds crazy, but these two events were the solidifying reason why Bitcoin became so popular, for better or for worse, which became the foundation of its net rise.
Donald Trump gave a full and unconditional pardon to Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the dark web drug marketplace Silk Road. In 2015, Ulbricht was handed 2 life sentences plus 40 years over the website, dubbed the Amazon of the drug trade, an unfettered market for illegal drugs.
Regardless, all these events brought with them an insane cult-like following that were in the millions. All of it happening within the decade that followed. The crypto space created infinite online communities. They had their own insider language like HODL, paper hands, FUD, FOMO, and so forth. Despite its critics, these blockchain projects had a lot of people who endorsed them. In 2014, a woman named Ruja Ignatova, nicknamed the Crypto Queen, created a cryptocurrency called OneCoin. Bitcoin was sailing at the price of $314 at the time. Her argument was that although people may have missed out on Bitcoin, her crypto coin was the one that was going to surpass it. She claimed to be the one to revolutionize the global monetary system, and the people believed her, joining her in droves, having millions of people from 75 different countries sign into her crypto club, all within 18 months. The reason why it had such a fast growth was because of the design of its marketing that allows users to earn money from its bottom line. In just a few short months, billions of dollars were invested into this one coin. It felt like there was no need to question such a shiny spectacle, who had such an impeccable background, who had supposedly made an appearance in the Forbes magazine, a figure who rubbed shoulders with politicians, and threw million-dollar parties. The single most important event she ever did was in an arena in London in the summer of 2016 with an audience of 3,000 people, where she announced she was going to increase her coins from the initial 2.1 billion to 120 billion, with the initial price of the coin staying the same. At that point, her followers were selling all their possessions, investing all their savings, and quitting their jobs, all to promote OneCoin.
A lot of you will bring even business partners or merchants. You become part of a community or of a family. This is what makes us strong. The community. 2 million people who are strong for this coin and who want to build their success.
But that was until in October 2017, she boarded a flight to Athens and was never seen ever since, disappearing with an estimation of $16 billion. Despite how tragic this sounds, what I still find interesting is that people, especially those who are in countries that are similar to mine, still promote this coin and believe that one day the crypto queen will return and deliver her promise. In 2018, there was a project that was found by Do Kwon and Daniel Sheen called Terra. In simple terms, Terra was a blockchain-based system that was used for algorithmic stablecoins. A stablecoin, you might ask, is a type of cryptocurrency where the value of a digital asset is supposed to be pegged to a reference asset, which could either be fiat currency, exchange-traded commodities, or other cryptocurrencies. The whole point of this was to power a reliable payment system, as well as to create a fully functioning ecosystem of decentralized applications, also known as dApps. Examples of these are Anchor, Mirror, and Pylon. This innovation was very impressive. In fact, it went so well that each Luna coin, which was the token it offered, was worth 116 per coin. That was until when May 2022 happened. During this time, Terra's blockchain had been put on halt after the collapse of the stablecoin Terra USD, as well as Luna. This problem wiped out 45 billion in market capitalization in just a week. And in January 2024, the company filed for bankruptcy. But before it did, one of the largest crypto exchanges in history had made waves before it filed for bankruptcy as well. This one was called FTX, created by Sam Bankman-Fried. Like the crypto queen, he was also known as the poster child of crypto.
Let's talk about what's going on with Sam Bankman-Fried. In just the past 5 years, Sam Bankman-Fried went from buying his first Bitcoin to becoming a multi-billionaire. The FTX founder is now worth an estimated $11 billion.
But all that came to an end when he was arrested in December in the year of 2022, having been convicted of wire fraud, commodities fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and a bunch more. Although popular, these events were just the tip of the iceberg. More fraud and scams kept on happening, not to forget the ICO mania. What was once a $1.5 trillion industry had nearly $1 trillion wiped out in just a few years because of ridiculous themes like NFTs and meme coins. crypto brought about 400 years of financial mistakes that humanity has ever made, from the Great Depression, the housing market crash, the dot-com bubble, and other leaks of that nature, in just only 5 years. A lot of people thought Bitcoin would be the future, the new hope against a failing monetary system. But in reality, its technology has left a lot of holes in people's hearts. As its popularity grew, its technology became a lot slower and cumbersome, especially when it came to usage, as it required a lot more energy that it can't really keep up with as more and more people started to use it. And most people never even use it for transactions, but rather a store of value, which is also subjective because just like fiat currency, its value is based on speculation and consumer trust. Like the story Animal Farm by George Orwell, what was once a theme of a revolution became nothing more of an exact replica of its own oppressor. All this brings me back to the Great Depression of 1929, which was a period that was obscured with high rates of unemployment, poverty, as well as reduction in production and trade on a global scale. The countries that are said to have suffered the most are the US, UK, and Germany. This was the time where Wall Street had crashed and the time where America had lost faith in its financial system for the first time. But after World War II, America became the most powerful nation in the world, with its money made as the signature of the gold standard. All this happened because of the government. Central and commercial banks stepped in to prevent its country from falling into calamity. And we have seen this time and time again, from the 2008 recession and the 2019 pandemic. I'm not saying that these institutions are perfect. Far from it. But when things go really bad, they tend to be the ones to step in and fix it. Unlike the crypto space, where it's each man for himself, the government needs to stand as the pillar that holds both the commercial banking systems and the crypto space together. You can even see it in how it proposed the Bitcoin Act of 2024, of them buying 1 million Bitcoin in the next 5 years, despite it being a passive bystander for the past 13 years. There are even political figures like Donald Trump endorsing Bitcoin. All this led to Bitcoin's rise in momentum. As of today's recording, the crypto space now has a market cap of 3.5 trillion, with Bitcoin holding 54% of its denomination. Maybe it's too soon to underestimate its potential. Think about it. 50 years ago, email was just some basic technology that computer geeks used online to message each other. But now it's basically your ID for anything that you do that involves the internet. I basically envision a world where blockchain and fiat currency would work hand in hand, and it becoming responsible of creating a new free world of finance after this bubble is over. Or maybe they'll continue to stand on opposing sides as equals, kind of like game theory, where everything just stands still until the concept of money collapses entirely.
You've been dancing with the devil. Be careful who you gunning for, cause when it settles, it's only pain and grief when you living lawless. We only chase it if the chance of profit's flawless. We keep our eyes on the weak, they know that they targets. Hunting for goodwill, we ain't looking for.
We're gonna win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win so much. I love you all.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah. And this was no ordinary victory. This was a fork in the road of human civilization.